Murphy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Ooh, we're going to back that up just a notch. Keith Murphy, representing the people of District 16. Senate Bill 231 would not affect very many communities within New Hampshire, but essentially it sets maximum setback requirements that towns may allow from lot lines and for road frontage at 50 feet. And let me explain sort of the point of the bill. We all know there's a housing issue in New Hampshire. One of the primary causes of that housing issue is that towns have abused the zoning process. There was a time in this state's history, I would say most of the time in the state's history, where if you owned property, it was understood you owned that property, you could build as you pleased. And I think it would have struck a lot of people as offensive, the idea you could restrain people from that. But with the advent of modern technology and industries and modern septic systems, we in the legislature began to devolve power to the towns to dictate how far things could be built and lot sizes and such. And the idea was, and this is actually in the enabling statute, it was for health and safety. Well, health and safety has become anti-housing in order to deter development. And one of the ways they've done that is to have, in some cases, very large setback requirements. Now, again, this does not affect very many communities in New Hampshire, but just as an example, one district in the town of Lyme requires 8.2 acres to build a single-family home because that district has setback requirements of 150 feet. So I don't think anybody would think that's reasonable, and this is just an effort at reining in the zoning process that has been abused in several communities to begin to maybe restore some semblance of property rights while addressing the housing issues that have been created by those abuses. And that's my introduction, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. I'm reading this now. I want to make sure I'm reading it right. So if you look at line 3, you're adding a new section K, correct? This says to limit road frontage requirements and setbacks for wetlands. I'm trying to make sure how I'm reading this. Is this trying to limit road frontage, meaning you can't require any more than 50 feet of road frontage? That's the way I read it when I'm reading this, and I'm not sure from your testimony that's what your intent is with this. Sounds like you're just trying to address setbacks and not road frontage.
I did focus on the setbacks, but it would also limit road frontage.
So you wouldn't have allow any zone in any town to have more than a 50-foot road frontage requirement?
It would not allow communities to require more than 50 feet. If somebody had 60 feet of road frontage on a road, a Class 5 road or better, they'd be able to build on it.
Okay, I'm sorry if I may follow. I know like in my town of Loudon, I sat on zoning for many years, we have different districts within our town that in some areas require, like the agricultural district requires 400 feet of road frontage to be considered a residential lot. So this would change that and only make it allow 50 feet, if I'm reading this correctly?
It would. If that's not the will of the committee, you could certainly strike the road frontage requirement portion of this, and then would apply to front and side setbacks.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, because from your testimony, it sounded like you were just trying to get to setbacks.
To give you another example, to counterbalance yours, I've got a constituent in Hooksett. He has 40 acres, and it's a pie-shaped lot, and only about 40 feet of road frontage. He's being told he can build one house on his 40 acres because his road frontage qualifies for one house on 40 acres, which is not really reasonable. And that's how we have gotten, one of the ways we've gotten to sort of this housing issue is making it too hard to build in this state.
Well, there are other provisions within zoning that would allow him to gain some relief for that, but anyway, that's okay. So, thank you. I just wanted to clarify the point. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Waters.
Did you?
I'll get you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And not being entirely cognizant of all zoning issues, I did have a question about the language here, because it says ensuring these requirements do not exceed 50 feet. But then you go on and ensuring such limitations are consistent with existing shoreline protection standards under RSA 43B9 and 489-2. So where I'm a little confused is 43B9 2B references the setback from the reference line. So the reference line might be 50 feet, although if there's a slope, it might be farther from the waterfront. But then you add to the 50 feet the setback, which depending on, can be 50 feet from the front. And I don't know what the front of a lot would be, whether that be the shoreline or the road. But then front and side's 30 feet. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that by the way this is written, in referencing those not violating those other sections, you'd say that it's the 50 feet, yes, but then also the setback from the reference line might be another 50 feet or 30 feet or more, depending on whether there's a slope or environmental.
The goal, Senator, thank you for the question. The goal, Senator, is not to override local environmental protections or statewide environmental protections. I think we all want a clean environment. We all care about that. It's simply to make sure it's reasonable. If,
Yes.
let's say a community wants to require people to be 300 feet from the wetland edge, is that reasonable?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say no.
Senator
Yeah,
Rosen?
thank you. And I, just to clarify then, that this as written would not encroach upon the municipality's determination of what the appropriate setback from the reference line is.
And by reference line, you were referring to the
That's
wetlands
50
edge,
feet from the water.
the wetlands edge. It would say it would be 50. It could not be more than 50 feet. So most communities that I've read, that I've researched, use 50 feet as their setback from the wetland edge.
Well, I guess if I may continue, the problem is that by referencing those other statutes, the 483B9, and saying that it doesn't prevent that, 483B9 says you have the 50 feet, which is the reference line, and then the setback is beyond that.
And that's correct. And I'm sorry if I misunderstood
Yeah.
your initial question, but what you just said is absolutely correct.
All right, so that would be maintained, it'd be 50 feet plus more. It's not limited to 50 feet, it's 50 feet, and then you get your setback as appropriate.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you, thanks.
Senator Rosenwald?
How many towns do you think this would affect in New Hampshire?
Setback portion, it looks to me to be about 5 or 6. I've read the zoning atlas produced by the St. Anselm College, and it's just a very small number of towns that will be affected. Now, Senator Pearl pointed out the frontage requirement may affect more towns than that in a residential area, which is why I would be open to removing
The road frontage?
the road frontage requirements.
And if I
Yeah,
can
follow-
follow up, how did you arrive at 50 feet? Was that based on some science or?
Well, I was at
What?
one point a town planner in this state, so I've got some passing semblance, passing understanding of various zoning ordinances in different towns. I'm very familiar with zoning codes in my district and all my towns, and 50 feet seems to be the standard. 50 feet or less. Most towns actually that have any sort of density go down to 20 feet or 25 feet on the sides.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Senator, for taking the question. So I'm not so inclined to drop the frontage right away, so I just want to make that
It's a decision
statement.
for you and your
Yeah,
committee.
and that'll be a discussion we'll have, but one of the housing biggest issues for someone developing, or even the mom and pop that builds 3 or 4 homes and has a lot, is the wider the lot, the more pavement you have to have, the more cost it is, and it starts generating the cost higher. I read this morning our entry-level home now is in excess of $500,000. So we have to do something. So I just want to make that statement. We'll have that conversation, and I'm in favor of what this is as written. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald, do you have a follow-up?
So Thank you. In Nashua, there's very little developable land left. And one thing we see is these kind of, I think they're called keyhole lots, where there's a really long driveway and the house is kind of at the back of it.
I got one of those.
And there is a concern about fire trucks getting to some of those houses. Also, our streets tend to be kind of narrow. And I don't understand what the effect of this might be on fire trucks being able to get to really dense housing.
I do not believe this bill would affect a very dense district at all because they would already have road frontage and setback requirements far less than 50 feet. So all those districts would already meet this requirement, wouldn't be affected at all.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Senator, for your
Thanks, Chairman.
testimony. We're going to hear from Brody. I'll wait for the later, give you some, come on in.
Oh, okay. I thought you were telling me to wait.
No, tell him, give him some people. And you are opposed, wishing to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for taking my testimony this morning. My name is Brody DeShays. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are currently opposed to Senate Bill 231 as written. The language of Senate Bill 231 focuses on restricting the amount of road frontage that can be required and controlling setbacks for wetlands and lot lines to increase density in the majority of zoning districts throughout the state. It also says that these requirements, frontage, wetland, and lot line dimensions, cannot exceed 50 feet. Senate Bill 231 is a very broad zoning mandate, erasing many, if not all, existing dimensional requirements and limiting the lot line setbacks, wetland setbacks, and frontage requirements to no more than 50 feet, as I previously mentioned. This would require municipalities to limit frontage and setbacks to increase more density in many zoning districts where this may not be feasible, especially shoreline districts or some agricultural districts. We also believe Senate Bill 231 conflicts with RSA 483-B:3, Roman 2, which states, quote, when the standards and practices established in this chapter conflict with other local or state laws and rules, the more stringent shall control, end quote. The bill also likely conflicts with RSA 43-B:8(2), which encourages and permits municipalities to adopt local regulations to promote shoreline protections. This would essentially erase many of the shoreline protections that municipalities have adopted in their local zoning. Additionally, kind of to Senator Rosenwald's point, this bill would mandate hammerhead lots or permitting lots with long rights-of-ways next to lots with conforming frontage requirements in order to increase housing density. Doing this does not consider how difficult it could be to get large safety equipment like a fire truck or ambulance down a narrow driveway during an emergency. It also doesn't consider that driveways, paved or not, are considered impervious surfaces and would have harmful runoff that would negatively impact wetlands or neighboring properties. So obviously, by putting a driveway next to someone's property, you're going to make it so that more water is going to run onto their property. That's going to impact their property rights and the property that they own. Almost always, there's been some allusion to larger acreage requirements in many municipalities. These requirements are often, especially when they're large, 4 acres or larger. These tend to be in areas that are zones that permit agricultural use. So that's why they tend to have more frontage requirements and more larger lot sizes, because those agricultural uses, they don't want them to impact the butters. Road frontage requirements would also likely impact, at least in this bill, almost every municipality's zoning. I mean, almost every municipality has road frontage requirements in most of their districts, or especially those that are more agricultural or single-family residential that are larger than 50 feet. So for all those reasons, we are opposed to Senate Bill 231, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
So instead of it being a keyhole, it's called a hammerhead.
I mean, I've heard keyhole, I've heard hammerhead, whatever we want to call it, but I think we understand, that long right of way and that it opens up into a larger lot, and oftentimes people will subdivide to try to promote development that way.
Senator? He's got a good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Perhaps you could educate me a bit here. I understand, I'm listening to the discussion about agricultural lots and need for a wider, for some reason. But I'd like to talk about that concern about getting a fire truck into a driveway. So I have a lot that's 50 feet wide, and I have a lot that's 250 feet wide. Why is one driveway on one any different than the other? And wouldn't those items be addressed during the building permit or the land use in the town, that whatever width that driveway had to be? I having built quite a few lots and own quite a few commercial properties, I don't see that argument. Perhaps you could help me.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to remember is that if there's an issue where a fire truck can't go onto someone's driveway, at least they have the road that's there, and then they can, carry a lot of those safety implements, or whether it's water, other things up the driveway, versus if you have a 150, 200 foot, 300-foot driveway that wraps all the way around, it's much more difficult and much more cumbersome for public safety equipment to be taken down that longer driveway. So many municipalities, they have concerns when people have these long hammerhead lots for the reason of being able to get that equipment back there, where they can stage on a private or a public road in front of the dwelling should there be like a fire or an emergency. So by having that dwelling behind another dwelling, behind that lot and farther away from the road where the driveway connects, it just makes it more difficult. It's a safety issue for not just people in the dwelling, but also those who are trying to fight the fire. And the risk too, if they don't fight the fire soon enough, it could spread to possibly other dwellings, depending on how dense the district is, or obviously to maybe neighboring woodland.
Yes, I just want to thank you for your answer there. And I'm not totally sold, but thank you so much for your opinion.
Senator Rosenwald? No. Senator Pearl?
So good morning, good to see you. Thanks
see
for
you.
coming in. You brought up agricultural zoning, which is obviously a topic that's near and dear to my heart, being in the ag industry my whole life. I mean, we can have a discussion at some point about whether 5-acre lots, so my town of Loudon, I'll use that for an example, we require 400 feet of frontage in 5-acre lots in our agricultural zone. Again, we can have a discussion about whether that really promotes agriculture or just is attempting to slow down building within that area, which I guess leaves land open. But I guess my concern is how many towns in the state, I mean, isn't this going to impact almost every single town in the state? Because don't most towns have, well, at least towns that have zoning, don't they have some portion of their town that has larger than a 50-foot frontage requirement? At least I believe all 12 of the ones in my district do.
I'll let you finish your question.
No, that's kind of my
okay,
question.
that's right.
I'm just trying to figure out what this actually impacts.
From our estimation, yes, it would nearly impact almost, not all. There are some pretty dense districts where the frontage requirements aren't 50 feet, especially in like village districts or in some of our cities. But nearly outside of those very dense districts that existed likely before zoning and developed before zoning, it would impact those frontage requirements. And it would really alter the way that agricultural districts will look around the state. Many of the bills that actually have come before the Senate and the House this year, especially that have to do with acreage requirements, would, from our estimation, we've kind of realized pretty recently at the Municipal Association internally, it would essentially ban all agricultural districts to some extent, which is a concern that we have.
I see no further questions. Thank you very much. Barbara?
Thank you, Chair Avard, and the members of the committee for the opportunity to comment on Senate Bill 231. My name is Barbara Richter. I'm the Executive Director at the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commissions. And NHACC is a nonprofit organization working to support conservation commissions so that they can protect their local natural resources. We serve 217 conservation commissions here in the state, and commissions are charged with protecting wetland and water resources in their communities under RSA 36A. So because conservation commissions play a role in protecting the quality and integrity of the town's water resources, we urge you to vote ITL on this bill so that New Hampshire municipalities can better protect their local water resources and built infrastructure. Conservation commissions recognize the importance of protecting water resources and understand that taking care of the uplands is critical to ensure that wetlands remain a viable resource here in New Hampshire. Wetlands provide critical functions, including flood control, water quality maintenance through filtering pollution, wildlife habitat, groundwater recharge, and shoreland stabilization. New Hampshire municipalities should have the right to establish buffer zones that are appropriate to protect water quality and infrastructure in their communities. New Hampshire RSA 674 grants this power to communities and provides the foundation of a municipality's right to zone. Local ordinances must go through a rigorous review process and vote by citizens. So please do not take away this right from cities and towns. More than 150 towns in New Hampshire have local shoreland or wetland buffer regulations. Setbacks and buffers in these municipalities range from 25 to 150 feet, depending on the water resource, soils, and the type of development going in. This bill would restrict the town's ability to use science and safety standards to determine the appropriate setbacks and buffers for development in their communities. And in addition, there's no connection between towns that have local wetland and shoreland buffer zones and housing affordability. Many towns that were built before buffers were enacted are now some of the most expensive towns in the state. If you look at Portsmouth, that was built along waterways, and it's probably one of the most expensive communities in the state of New Hampshire. So many towns are now dealing with expensive infrastructure issues due to the increasing and severe storms we're having that expand flooding and destroy homes and buildings. So the cost of rebuilding and repairing infrastructure continues to increase the tax burden for citizens. Many towns now need to build flood walls, replace culverts, and elevate roadways in properties to prevent flood damage. So this is very expensive for taxpayers and will add to the cost of housing. So there's no evidence that restricting the town's ability to create local zoning laws that it will reduce the price of houses. And in fact, in this case, the opposite may be true. Creating shoreland and wetland buffers will help reduce the cost to taxpayers and homeowners in the long run by providing space for floods and storm surges. It simply makes sense to give towns the ability to make local decisions when it comes to development along streams and waterways. NHACC opposes this bill, and we urge you to vote ITL on Senate Bill 231. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this bill didn't apply to setbacks for wetlands, would that allay your concerns?
I mean, it would certainly help because that's what we're most concerned about, wetlands and waterways. But I do understand the need for New Hampshire towns to have the ability to create their own setbacks, whether it's for road frontage or waterways.
Thank you.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't know if you heard my earlier questions of the sponsor about whether or not this affects the ability to set setbacks behind the reference line. And he seemed to indicate, and I believe by the language of it, that it does not affect the ability of the municipality to establish, to have the regular setbacks past the 50-foot reference line. But I don't know how you read the way this is constructed.
Well, it's not clear. So in my reading was that it would restrict, it simply says to limit road frontage requirements and setbacks for wetlands to improve the housing density. So I would read that it would impact a local authority to create, yeah.
So
maybe I'm not, I guess I don't have a clear answer for that because this isn't clear to me.
So would it be fair to say the problem is this, that if you look on line 4, you have ensuring these requirements do not exceed 50 feet, which is the way you're seeing it. But then it goes on, and ensuring such limitations are consistent with existing shoreline protections under 43B9, which is where you get the
Right.
the reference line at 50, and then the additional setback beyond that. And so I guess that I'm not sure there's a way to resolve that conflict given these languages. It does seem contradictory. One seems to say, no matter what, no more than 50 feet. And then the next phrase seems to say, yeah, but also the respect to the statute, which says it's going to be more than 50 feet, and the municipalities have the right to do the setback beyond the reference line. So I don't know. I think there's, is it fair to say that's the source of the confusion?
That is certainly confusing. Just keep in mind that the shoreline protection standards only apply to certain fourth order streams or greater. So wetlands don't fall under the shoreline protection, and certain, many streams, many of the smaller streams aren't under that jurisdiction, as well as, you know, rivers and ponds, some of the smaller ponds. So while this does indicate that it's not in conflict with the state regulation, just keep in mind that that's only covering fourth order streams or greater.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meredith?
Good morning, Chairman Avard, members of the committee, Meredith Hatfield for the Nature Conservancy. We have many of the same concerns as prior speakers, so I'll try not to be repetitive. We do not have a position on the road frontage or the lot lines, other than to agree with the points raised by the Municipal Association about the potential impacts on agriculturally zoned areas. That's definitely of concern to us. We're strong supporters of working lands and forests. Our main concern is the setback to wetlands, eliminating a municipality's ability to have more than a 50-foot setback when necessary. And we also share some of the concerns that Senator Waters was just discussing with the prior witness about it is confusing that line 4 says it can't exceed 50 feet, but then line 5 also requires that it's consistent with those other two RSAs for shoreland protection and environmental standards. And we agree with the Association of Conservation Commissions about the very important role that wetlands do play. And so we're concerned about limiting a municipality's ability to have an appropriate setback. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. And our final speaker is Sarah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning, committee. Thank you for your time. My name is Sarah Holland. I am a realtor with Coldwell Banker in Plymouth, so I'm in the more rural part of the state, and I'm also the 2025 Public Policy Chair for the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. We ask for your support in Senate Bill 231. We see it as a tool, as many other bills that have been before you this session, to kind of open up the opportunity for housing. This is not something that is going to apply to every single property, as not everyone is going to subdivide their property and make smaller and smaller lots. So there are just numerous ways that New Hampshire towns can limit the size, and therefore the affordability and the affordability of a buildable housing lot. They can do a variety of things, like making larger minimum lot size requirements. They could increase setbacks from adjacent properties, have minimum yard requirements, on and on and on. And this is one of the ways that we can kind of free up the opportunity for folks, if they choose, to be able to purchase a property, whether it is a non-conforming lot. Historically, maybe it only had a 50-foot boundary along the roadway, and in today's standards, in particular towns, they may not be able to develop that property. So it creates a lot more opportunity For folks, there are plenty of towns in New Hampshire that have 50-foot or lesser setback or roadway requirements. I know we're talking about two completely different things in this bill. One is wetlands and one is road frontage requirements. And I'm happy to submit this testimony, but what I'd like to do is answer some of the questions that I've heard from previous witnesses to see if I can offer some clarification. So there is a distinction between shoreland and wetlands, and the provision that is in this protects the Shoreland Water Quality Protection Act within this bill. So if a water body falls under the Shoreland Water Quality Protection Act, as previously stated, then it is protected in those guidelines. So that 50-foot buffer plus that 250-foot area of protection that they have to follow very specific requirements as far as that development goes. So those properties would still fall underneath that. Also,
If I may, just
please.
ask on that one. Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure, hit your mic.
So just before we move on to the next one, it does seem to me that if that's your intent, that there needs to be some change of that and ensuring. I think we need some other language there.
Okay.
Like maybe but not contravening or something. I do think we need to change that.
So on line 6, it says does not override environmental standards under
Yeah,
that section.
And ensuring such limitations are consistent with, so I think that the problem is that you say ensure this and ensure that, but they conflict with each other. So I
Sure.
think that what's trying to be said there, ensuring those, maybe it should be ensuring those requirements not exceed 50 feet unless such limitations are inconsistent with.
Happy to
So
take that
might be
under
the way to
advisement.
go on that, but I hear your intent there, but I'm still think the language,
Sure.
does that seem to make sense to you?
It does. I'm reading it a little bit differently just because of the awareness of the difference between wetlands and
Well,
shorelands.
we'll work on it,
So, yeah.
I just wanted to interrupt for that moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it.
Well, continue.
Okay, great. And then there was some talk about the 50-foot width and access for fire trucks and for emergency vehicles. The average road width in the U.S. in general is 50 feet. So if a fire truck is able to drive down a normal road, then they should be able to drive down a driveway, which is generally about 20 feet wide, and be able to access any of those properties. So that's something that the town is going to take under advisement when they're doing their approval process for permitting, for new construction and all of that. DOT is also going to, if it is a New Hampshire maintained roadway, they are also going to have some oversight here as well. And then they're going to be input from the public works in that municipality. So there are currently a number of towns in the state of New Hampshire that have 50-foot or less road frontage for their minimum road frontage for their lots. And those towns have not found any safety concerns that have required them to increase that over time.
I mean,
Follow-up?
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you heard the concerns about the agricultural districts.
Yes.
What about if on line 3 there was an exception for agricultural districts?
That is not something that, that's something I would have to take back to my body
Would you?
for
Thank you.
opinion, yeah.
You may continue.
And then also the mention of mechanisms already in the town to receive a variance to go from a larger lot or a larger frontage size down to a smaller frontage size. That's a maybe, right? So folks who are interested in doing that, there's a lot of time and effort and money that is involved in going before a board to petition for just a maybe. And some folks just decide that that's not worth their time. They're not going to haggle with the town. So that is something that we've talked about a lot in this housing crisis, and that there is a mechanism for it, but it's not a widely used mechanism because the fact that it isn't 100%, right? Asking for that permission is not 100% within the towns. And folks are very confused by the process. They have to expend money and time in order to go through it and still not be sure whether or not they can proceed. So that's why this part of our legislation is to ask for you to make this top-down measure to enable all towns to be able to open up some development if a property owner chooses.
Thank you very much. Oh, got one.
Question.
Okay,
If
we're gonna limit it to these last 2 questions, so we've got 4 other bills to do.
Okay. Well, I'll only ask one of them then. Although I think, I've been looking at the statute that this amends, and one provision is to promote agricultural use, so I think it's conflicting. But my question is, what is it in 674-17-1 that makes all of this developable land be housing and not other uses like commercial or manufacturing?
That would have to do with the zone, the specific zone in the town, and what is allowable in that particular zone. So this is just reducing that minimum, that setback or that minimum road frontage for all lots relative to development. And I apologize, Senator, I don't have
was a
the full.
million answer.
That's
Okay, thank you.
I don't have that.
Do you want to follow up?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we're going to close the hearing on this. And hear from the prime sponsor of 232.
Thank you.
Yep, all right. I'll be following you after. Senator, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, illustrious members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here. For the record, I'm Mark McConkey. I hail from the town of Freedom, and I represent the good people in Senate District 3. I'm here today to introduce Senate Bill 232, clarifying certain net meter terms and conditions. And Mr. Chairman, I will apologize. I am to be in another committee at this same time slot, so I'll be brief in my opening. Some remarks on the purpose of Senate Bill 232. Some bullets. The primary goal of this bill is to provide clarity and resolve confusion around metering requirements, eligibility criteria, and grandfathering provisions in New Hampshire's group net metering program. Also, the intent is to provide clear guidelines to ensure the program's continued success and fairness. It does not expand the net metering program. It simply offers clarity for certain participants in those few existing facilities that are currently eligible but have not yet been approved to participate. Also, I have an amendment to the bill that I've handled out to you that streamlines Section 3 and sets the effective date upon passage. And finally, I hope this will find this bill worthy of ought to pass with amendment vote.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator, and you are dismissed if you need to go to someplace else.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So we're going to hear from Matt Young, Department of Energy, New Hampshire DOE, who is ambivalent.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Matt Young, and I'm attorney at the New Hampshire Department of Energy. And the department is neutral on this bill. And just wanted to, I guess, sort of raise a few issues for the committee's consideration on Senate Bill 232. The first has to do with Section 1 of the bill. So what Section 1, I believe the intent of Section 1 was, and of Section 1 is to codify sort of the status quo in the market. And part of, I guess, this transaction is that these renewable energy generators assign certain rights to utilities when they want a net meter, and then the utilities are able to collect revenues from the ISO New England markets, and they then use those revenues to offset net metering costs. Now, most of what I just mentioned is not referenced in this section, and what the department will be looking at and kind of monitoring as this bill moves forward is that those revenues are continuing to be used to offset net metering costs, just to ensure that those costs remain as low for ratepayers. The other issue that I just wanted to mention involves the language included in Section 2.
Give him a copy of this. Do you have a copy of that?
I do.
Okay. I didn't.
Thank you.
All right, yeah.
I appreciate that. For the language in Section 2, the department does appreciate the I guess, attempt at certainty that this language provides for already participating facilities. I think one thing that has been raised within the department is that this language may be too broad. And I would just point you to the use of already in line 24, on page 1, there's a reference to already eligible facilities. The department has some concerns that could just be too broad to include sort of an unknown number of facilities there. And that being said, as the chairman helped point me to, the department does not have any concerns with this amendment here. So with that, I will happily
like the
answer
bill.
questions.
Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. On your first point about lines 3 through 6, do you want any clarifying language to ensure?
So there's no, sort of as I mentioned, there's nothing in this language that says the status quo would be altered, and it's my understanding that is part of a settlement agreement from 2021. It's just something that the department is thinking about and will monitor as it moves through the legislative process.
So I have, if I may, a couple of questions about what you point out in line 24. I mean, as you know, we have Senate Bill 228, which is looking at folks who already are customer generators to be able to then join another group. And so I was wondering, because this has prospectively here, what that might mean for any changes that the legislature wants to make for the opportunity of existing ones to be able to participate in that way. And I'm not, it's confusing to me a little bit. And I just didn't know whether it would be necessary to wiggle this to say that, I mean, I'm just not sure I'm not sure there's a conflict there, but you see what I'm getting at?
So I think I would have to, I'm not sure if you're offering to propose new language into this bill to make the changes that are in 228, but I think we would have to kind of look at any proposed language.
You see what I'm getting at, that if somebody who's in existing status and wants to be able to join another group, then would this preclude that?
I think I'd have to take a second look.
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Thomas? No, sir. That happens all the time.
My name is Thomas LaPerriere. I am a resident of Milton, New Hampshire, and I am a owner of a home, and the solar array that I started just before the one-to-one net metering went away. Should I reread that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're fine.
As I read this bill, which is a little bit complex from my understanding, this would basically protect my rights as someone who has an agreement from future changes that might be adverse to me. And that's my understanding of what the bill does for me. And quite frankly, I'm very glad to have that. I live in fear of my agreement being changed somehow. And I'm not sure that that would be legally right, but then again, might be not something I can defend against. That said, I'd rather not be extemporaneous. I'd prefer to read my statement. I have never been, by any reasonable estimate, a high-income person, but I have used the small amount of money I have in a responsible way to make myself a fairly self-sufficient person. By first purchasing land, then putting up a building, and then finally building it out into an efficient home equipped with one-to-one net-metered solar array, I have insulated myself from skyrocketing housing costs and energy costs. I have acted responsibly, and I believe I have earned the right to be protected. I support SB 232 because I believe it will create protections vital to my economic security. In the past, when energy prices were stable, home ownership was all one needed to be self-sufficient. But today, owning some means of creating one's own energy is becoming essential to self-sufficiency. Array ownership and an arrangement that enables domestic use is essential, and a grid-tied one-to-one net-metered system is a sensible ideal for energy independence for the individual homeowner. Self-sufficiency is independence. When the 2008 mortgage crisis hit our country, because over 1/3 of residential homes in New Hampshire were fully owned, free of mortgage responsibilities, that crisis was much less severe here than elsewhere in the country. A culture of personal responsibility and the self-sufficiency it creates saved us from the worst effects of that crisis. In the current state of our world, a future energy crisis is very likely. Having more in-state producers can mitigate these events. And the key to this is protecting the ones we have and assuring investors in local energy production that any contracts they have will be secure in the future. Better contract protections, not subsidies, can create production in the state of New Hampshire and ensure the facilities we already have are maintained and remain productive. As one of the last residential customers to obtain a one-to-one net metering agreement, I witnessed the demise of the residential solar industry in New Hampshire. Up until 2018, while one-to-one net metering was available, small businesses installing solar arrays for individual homeowners flourished. Their signs were proudly displayed at the end of driveways where homeowners willing to invest in their own energy security paid good money to skilled contractors installing solar arrays and their associated equipment. Because a master electrician was required, these small businesses were headed by a well-trained and rigorously licensed professional employing an able-bodied team of skilled workers. These are the kind of able-bodied, skilled workers we want to keep employed here in New Hampshire, not looking for work elsewhere because there is no work for them here. But for reasons that are a mystery to me, some restless bureaucrats decided the framework of rules that enable this needed changing, and a booming trade in residential solar was put out to pasture by the simple act of making rules unfair to the people putting up the money in the first place, the homeowners. There is an inherent fairness to one-to-one net metering. If you make a kilowatt, you own that kilowatt. That just makes sense. Assure a homeowner of that as an unchangeable fact, and investing tens of thousands of precious dollars makes sense. Residential solar flourished because one-to-one net metering made instinctual sense to the people whose money and property were the most vital component. As I said, it's a mystery to me why some restless bureaucrats chose to kill the residential solar boom, putting many residential solar installers out of business and hundreds, perhaps thousands of able-bodied skilled workers out of their jobs. I support SB 232 because it can prevent something like that from happening again, perhaps to me. I fear the benevolence of restless bureaucrats seeing my energy independence as a bad thing and the ruination of my hard-earned self-sufficiency as serving the greater good. I don't wish to be left wondering why when it's already too late to do anything about it. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to ask.
Seeing none, thank you very much. Can we have a copy of the testimony?
I believe I provided one, and I have more. If anybody would like a copy, just raise your hand.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Madeline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. My name is Madeline Minot, and I'm representing the Granite State Hydropower Association, which is the trade association for small hydropower producers in the state of New Hampshire. When people think about net metering, you often think about solar, but our small hydropower generators in the state are many of the group hosts, both under the original net metering program up to 1 megawatt and the newer municipal host program. We very much support this bill. Section 1, as mentioned by DOE, the intent is to maintain status quo. Facilities like ours that were registered ISO New England market participants, when we switch over to being a group host and participating in net metering, assign the asset in the ISO system to the utility. That generates revenue that goes to the utility and helps to offset the cost of the program to ratepayers. So we think that's a good thing. It also allows us to have sort of an insurance policy or a backup plan. If something happened to net metering and it went away, all of a sudden, either by an act of the legislature or the PUC, we would be able to go very quickly back to selling into the wholesale market. If we were ever required to retire from the markets entirely in order to be able to participate in net metering, and net metering went away for whatever reason, it would be a very long and challenging process to get back into the ISO markets. And so for that duration of time, we would have a completely stranded asset that can't put power on the grid. And finally, I wanted to clarify that that section also does not in any way prevent voluntary retirement. So if for any reason a customer generator, because of an agreement with an off-taker, wanted to not participate in the markets anymore, they absolutely could do that voluntarily. They just can't be required to do it in order to participate. Section 2, as mentioned, the intent is to protect against retroactive changes. GSHA has been involved in the ongoing net metering docket at the PUC. It's been going on for well over 2 years. We invest a lot of our time and resources participating in those dockets, almost entirely to protect against retroactive changes. If we had language like this, it would provide us some certainty and allow us to not have to be so involved at the PUC to try to protect the projects that are currently in the program. And finally, many applications for group hosts have been delayed over the past year over questions about metering requirements to be able to switch over to net metering. And so the intent with the amendment is to try to provide clarity both for the applicants as well as the reviewers at DOE and the utilities so that we can all be on the same page and hopefully make everybody's life a little bit easier. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, I have one. So Nashua takes advantage of the hydro, is that correct?
Correct.
Is that up and full running at full capacity?
Yes. Well, so Jackson, knock on wood, the new turbine is almost ready to go, hopefully in the next month. And so it will go back to being a group host under the original net metering program. And Mine Falls, just last October, became a group host and is group net metering with city and school facilities in Nashua. But Mine Falls had this metering question requirement. And so getting into the program was delayed and took longer while we could answer lots of questions and get on the same page about some of the current metering requirements and whether or not any changes were necessary.
So combined, what do they generate, or potentially generate for Nashua or group?
Sure. So Jackson is 1 megawatt. With the new turbine, it might be a little more efficient. So that's in the 3 to 4 million kilowatt hours a year. It is group net metered with the wastewater facility entirely. So it supplies Nashua's wastewater facility with all the electricity it needs. And then Mine Falls is 3 megawatts. So that generates about 12 million kilowatt hours a year, 12 to 14, depending on if it's a good water year. And that's pretty much supplying the rest of the city and all of the school facilities.
And we're having a good water year, aren't we?
We are not.
We're not?
We had a really dry fall.
Oh.
And so we're hoping that the snow and the warm temperatures is going to kick off spring snow melt, and we're going to have a good rest of the water year.
So that's nice, clean energy, ladies and gentlemen.
It
Just
is.
want to point that out. And thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Rosenwald, did you have a question? Yeah. Senator Waters?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madeline. So you heard my earlier question about whether or not this would potentially conflict with the customer generator is already a group host who wants to join another group. And what's your thought?
Yeah, I can say certainly the intent is not to tie the legislature's hands. The intent is to put guardrails on the PUC, to be honest. So that could be clarified that provision would apply to PUC orders, not necessarily to future legislative changes or something like that. And the intent is to prevent harmful changes, right? My understanding is Senate Bill 228 would make it more inclusive, more permissive. And so I think maybe we could come up with some language to prevent harmful retroactive changes, either make it clear that it applies to a PUC order implemented changes, or perhaps to say that, something that allows greater participation in the program can be retroactive.
Yeah, thank you. And that'd be helpful. Because whatever the intent is, if we have conflicts in the statute, we create a mess. So
Yes, understood.
thank you for that.
Further questions? Thank you very much, Madeline. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Sam Evans Brown from Clean Energy New Hampshire. CENH is also in support of this bill. It's funny, I was thinking about this bill and why it's necessary. And for those who live in our world, there's this famous book called Bonbright's Principles of Rate Making. And it's sort of the tome that dictates how regulation of utilities should be done. And a lot of those principles would tend to mitigate against retroactive changes that to tariffs that people have made investment decisions based upon. So stability, predictability, efficiency, these are all core principles of rate making. I think unfortunately over the last several years we've had a lot of unpredictability at the Public Utilities Commission, and I think that's why there's a feeling that this bill is necessary, and it's why I would encourage you all to support it. I don't think any more needs to be said about this, but just note, Clean Energy New Hampshire is in support of this bill.
Thank you, Matt. Sam? No, Matt, sorry.
I'll answer anything, really.
What was I thinking? So, no further questions? You saw the amendment?
I have seen the amendment, and also I hear the concerns that Senator Waters is expressing, and would be happy to work on language that would assuage those concerns.
But as is, you are still comfortable with what we have?
Yeah, so I would say the question of the metering arrangements that the utilities require, as long as the utilities are okay with the language in the amendment, I think that that's something that we have less of an opinion on. We are really focused on Section 2 overall, so we're fine with the language that I've seen.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And just for the record, Heidi Kroll from Brookfield. Here in support, not wishing to speak. Bart Barmouth in support, not wishing to speak. Who else? Michael Licata from Eversource in support, not wishing to speak. So just want the public to know that there are other people here but in support of the bill, but not wishing to speak. And with that, we're going to close the hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. We can do that. I still gotta open my bill and then I might have an interview.
Does not want to go there. There seems to be a negative. You're very positive.
You might be in a minute.
I'm here until 11:15.
All right, thank you. And Senator Waters, you're recognized. That's all right. You can make amendments and anything. You can go into exec, you name it. Senator, you have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 235, enabling funds from the Pittman-Robertson Act to be spent by the Fish and Game Department on threatened and endangered species in New Hampshire. So I would like to just note that this is one of the recommendations that came out of the study committee we did last summer on fish and game. And what it is intent here is to give the department some flexibility to use funds derived from the taxes on the sale of equipment to hunters, fishermen, and trappers to be matching funds for the acquisition of land to protect land for threatened and endangered species. Now, just a little bit of background on this, that the Pittman-Robertson funds and funds that are derived from license fees of hunters and fishers rightly ought to be used for acquisition of land to make sure that hunting and fishing can be sustained. And that's a good and important principle. But with these restrictions, it has made it harder and harder for the department to have sufficient matching funds to fulfill the Wildlife Action Plan identification of lands that ought to be required for the non-game thing. So the non-game matches are provided from a couple of other sources, conservation license plate funds and non-game donations, but this source here on the sale of equipment, which no other state has a restriction on, if we eliminate that, that'll give more flexibility and potentially more funding to be used. Now, I will note that, any land put into conservation, whether it's for threatened and endangered or particularly for hunting and fishing, is all to the good. There's a mutuality there. I'm going to let the department talk a little bit more about the details of this, but I just will say in general that, you think about the sale of equipment and ammunition in particular. Most of the ammo is used at the range, not while hunting, and there's been an increase in percentage of sales of equipment and so on, which are not directly related to the activities of hunting and fishing for what you pay for your license to make sure you have sustainable game to hunt and fish to catch. It's also certainly in the context of we're trying to do everything we can to sustain the funding of the Fish and Game Department. We know that the fund will be drained about down to nothing after the next 2 years, so this is one small way to give them some ability to not leave federal funding on the table when it comes to trying to get matches for the Wildlife Action Fund. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I know we have a representative department here too.
See no questions? Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Senator. Appreciate it. And so, Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Dan Bergeron. I'm Chief of the Wildlife Division for New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. I'd like to thank Senator Waters for bringing this bill forward. It really is, a big part of this is providing flexibility for the department to utilize these funds. So the intent of these PR dollars was for the protection, restoration, conservation management of all wild birds and mammals and their habitats. So as Senator Waters pointed out, we are the only state in the country that has this additional restriction. The intent of the federal regulation was to use these funds for the management, protection of all these different wild birds and mammals. The apportionments have gone up substantially over the past several years. So 1994, for the first time, the apportionments for New Hampshire reached about $1 million. I believe it was 2009, it was up to 2 million. By 2014, we were up to 4 million. We reached a peak in 2023 of 7 million, and now we're about 5.5 million. So these funds have continued to increase. And the way that they work, it's 75% federal funds from the PR dollars, and the states have to provide a 25% match. Which tends to be what the issue is for the state, is finding that 25% match to utilize these funds. As these funds have continued to increase, one of the issues we run into is reverting funds because we cannot find a match to utilize all of them. And one of the issues is this restriction that we're not allowed to use them for threatened and endangered species. We've been able to avoid that to date, but what we've really been doing is kind of kicking the can down the road. And our concern is that at some point in the near future, we may not be able to utilize these, and we may have to send federal money back to the government and not use it for its intended purposes. Some examples of where this limits us and where it's limited us in the past. So for example, our non-game program, which is largely funded through conservation license plate or the moose plate funds and private donations, did work for the recovery and monitoring of American marten, which was threatened at the time. We were not able to use PR dollars to do any of that work. Other states would have been able to do that. American marten was a threatened species. The non-game program had to use non-game donations largely to fund that work. And we, through that work, we identified that the species could be delisted. But again, none of that work was able to utilize these PR dollars, which was the intent of the money. New England cottontail is another good example. That was a species that was hunted as recently as the early 2000s. That is now a state endangered species. We are part of a cooperative between some other states in the east that try to manage and prevent this species from becoming federally endangered. Right now it's state endangered. We're not able to use PR dollars, all other states are, so we can contribute a small amount of money through our non-game program, but if we were able to utilize PR dollars, we could leverage that, we could increase that threefold and provide substantially more money for really what would be what we're trying to do is prevent these species from becoming federally threatened or endangered, which obviously we want to do that for the conservation of the species, but that also comes with a lot of, if things become federally threatened or endangered, that comes with many additional restrictions for landowners and developers. So there's really a benefit to everyone here. And again, it was the initial intent, or it is the intent of the PR dollars. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I have a ton of rabbits in my yard.
So you likely have eastern cottontails.
Those are eastern cottontails.
Those are a non-native introduced species, and they are one of the contributing factors to the decline of the New England cottontail. They tend to be larger, more generalist, and they outcompete our New England cottontail.
And they're also bringing in the coyotes in my neighborhood.
They probably bring in a lot of things, yes. But that is a common. Actually, we just did a Facebook post about some of our New England cottontail work, and I think there is a misconception that what are you talking about? These things are very abundant, but what people are seeing is the introduced eastern cottontail. Our New England cottontails are very, very small numbers in the state.
Okay, Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I have two questions, if you would allow me. First, are you saying that we could use federal dollars as a match for federal dollars?
No, nope.
No other program that I know of.
No, so the match has to be non-federal money. Yep. So the way that we do that is the match that we typically use for game species is our game management account funds, which is derived from hunting licenses.
So it would offset.
It would, yes.
It would offset other agency funds.
Correct.
Okay. I was going to ask you to tell all other state agencies how they could use federal funds.
Yeah, there's
Federal-
very few
federal
instances, yeah. There's very few instances where you can use federal dollars to match other federal dollars. There are a few exceptions, but not within PR.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, separately, I was reading over the weekend about this Pittman Robertson Fund, and my understanding is that 93% of the funds come from the federal tax on guns and ammunition. And of those purchases, 74% of the gun and ammo purchases are not used for hunting. So am I correct in thinking that non-hunters are subsidizing hunting of mammals and birds through the limitation?
Yes, to some extent. So there has been a shift where the bulk of so it's firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. And there has been a shift where a lot of those funds are coming from things that aren't necessarily for hunting, so target shooting and things like that. There's been a large increase in that. You tend to see jumps in, there was a big jump in 2023, 2022, 2023 after the elections. So you tend to see these shifts like that depending on, what party gets elected and, the rush to buy guns and ammunition. There's probably some overlap there where some of those individuals are also hunters. So it's tough to sugar that off exactly. But yes, there has been a shift in where these funds are coming from. In terms of types of firearm and ammunition.
Thank you.
Being no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meredith?
Good morning, Chairman Avard, members of the committee. Meredith Hatfield for the Nature Conservancy. We support this legislation, and as Senator Waters noted, it was a unanimous recommendation from the study committee that worked last fall to consider how to address some of the funding issues that Fish and Game faces. Fish and Game is an incredible partner to the Nature Conservancy, and we've been working hard to support them in various ways, including sometimes providing match when we can. I did want to note that I attended the Division II House Finance Committee work session on House Bill 1 yesterday. And they were very supportive of the agency looking for creative ways to do things just like this, which I thought was a very encouraging sign. So we're very pleased to support this moving forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you. Carol? Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair in absentia, and members of the committee. I'm Carol Foss, Senior Advisor for Science and Policy at New Hampshire Audubon. I may not look it, but I was here when New Hampshire's Endangered Species Conservation Act was passed in 1979. And the reason this clause was put in the original bill was to ensure that endangered species management and research activities would not take away funding from game management activities. At the time, New Hampshire's allocation of Pittman Robertson funds was approximately $500,000. And there were 83,408 licensed hunters in New Hampshire. As Dan mentioned, the current allocation of Pittman Robertson funds is an order of magnitude higher, and it's exceeding $5 million. And there are now 60,000 and change licensed hunters. So Pittman Robertson funds are going up, license revenues are going down, and it's becoming an increasing challenge, as Senator Waters and Dan have said, to find adequate match. This bill is very straightforward. It merely removes that section of RSA 212A15 that prohibits use of revenues derived from sale of sporting arms and ammunition. The license revenue piece of the prohibition remains the same. If the state has adequate match from wherever, this bill has no effect. If the state does not have adequate match, this bill provides the department with flexibility. And our organization has been involved with raising match funds for endangered species work, working with Fish and Game going back to 1980 when the Endangered Species Conservation Act went into effect. So we stand ready to provide match in the future if that becomes necessary. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Okay, none. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else who wants to testify on Senate Bill 235? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. And I am going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 236, and Senator Avard had to leave to go introduce another bill in another committee, so I'm quickly going to introduce Senate Bill 236 for him relative to transferring control of the Electric Assistance Program to the Department of Energy. Max, do we have a sign-up sheet on this? Oh, you have it here. Okay, thank you. All right, Dawn, you're the first one I see. Come on up.
Happy to lead off Senator Pearl and I guess sort of de facto introduce the bill. Originally, I worked with Senator Waters on introducing a similar bill, and I think the plan that you all settled on was combining the bill that Senator Waters drafted for me, or at my request, with this bill that was introduced at the request of the Department of Energy. Either way, it is, I think, properly viewed by you as a bit of a housekeeping bill. The Electric Assistance Program is very important to ratepayers in New Hampshire, particularly those who are having difficulty affording the very crushing burden of electricity rates in the state right now. And with the PUC serving as primarily an adjudicative body, it makes sense for the administrative tasks of overseeing and administering the Electric Assistance Program to be firmly lodged in the Department of Energy. There is an advisory board, which the Department of Energy currently chairs, and on which my office serves, and on which the utilities all have representatives, as well as the community action programs that administer the Electric Assistance Program. And that body serves as a kind of a de facto governing board for the Electric Assistance Program. It does a very good job. It's been doing that work since the dawn of electric industry restructuring in the late 1990s, and I don't think this bill would change any of that. It would simply clarify that the Electric Assistance the Electric Assistance Program Advisory Board advises the Commissioner of Energy who administers the program. So I warmly recommend the bill to you. I thank all of the great minds in the New Hampshire Senate who apparently have been thinking alike, and I urge you to recommend it favorably to your colleagues for adoption and consideration by the other body.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Don, for all your work. And I just wanted to note one difference that there have been a couple of differences between my version and this version, and I think we understand that it needs to be the 1.5 given the likely reception of this elsewhere. whereas mine had it a little higher. I think the key change, though, is down on line 25, where I think there have been some concern that we have this $1 million accumulation limit, but it may be that the needs of the program in a given year might be greater than that, so that this would allow us the flexibility by changing shall to may, so that if it looks like there's a whole lot of people who are going to be applying for these funds, that if it goes over the 1 million, that's actually the purpose of the program, was to help the folks out.
Absolutely. Electric rates fluctuate up and down to some significant degree according to the vicissitudes of the wholesale electricity market. We live in very volatile times. I read in the paper this morning that there might be an upward blip in the price of electricity in New England thanks to tariffs on electricity imports from Canada. That's completely uncertain. I don't even know if those tariffs are going to apply to Canadian electricity imports or not, or how long they'll last, and that will have an effect. Global energy markets have an effect, and the Electric Assistance Program needs to be able to adapt. And since you mentioned the 1.5 mils, that 1.5 mils has been enshrined in statute since the Restructuring Act was adopted way back in 1996. I would have preferred to see it go up because inflation has exerted upward pressure on rates over the last generation, but I think for the reason you just gave, keeping that charge at 1.5 mils is reasonable and appropriate.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you as always. Appreciate your testimony.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Amanda Noonan from the Department of Energy. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this bill this morning. I'll start off by saying I heard someone say earlier they were here for the inauguration of some particular bill. I was at the Public Utilities Commission for the creation of the Electric Assistance Program, so this is very near and dear to my heart. And I would note that this bill, Don talked a lot about the different issues within this bill and the need for this assistance for low-income consumers in the state. But we see this bill more as a cleanup. The Electric Assistance Program is long since established. The rate is set in statute. We don't see a need, as Don Kreis commented, to increase that rate at this point in time. Down the road, should that be necessary, the ability to increase that rests with the legislature, not with the department, not with the commission. So it's truly an energy policy program that the department is well equipped to manage and administer. A couple of the additions that I understand are part of the merging of the two different bills is, one in particular is about the Electric Assistance Advisory Board, which you just heard a little bit about. The Electric Assistance Advisory Board is the offspring of the working group that created the Electric Assistance Program, that recommended the program the then commission adopted. And the group works well together, but we're not sure we need to embody that group in statute. It's very difficult once you name certain entities as part of a board for us to then compel them to be there. And so the voluntary, cooperative, collaborative nature of the board is working really well, and we're hesitant about calling people out within statute because it creates some tension and awkwardness, perhaps. I would also note, just kind of as an aside, we have one representative representing all 5 community action agencies. They're the lead community action agency for the Electric Assistance Program. It's a much more efficient model for them to coordinate among their fellow community action agencies and be one voice on the advisory board. The only other note that I would have, which I believe is on an amendment, Senator Waters, that you were considering, is to add the word commission back to section 1, 369B:113. If that's not still the case, I'm happy to end my comments there, but if that's still something you're considering, we think it adds some potential confusion down the road to put the word commission back in there rather than to just clearly identify that it's the department that has the ability to design these programs, to change these programs going forward.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, we appreciate it. Anybody
you.
else that would like to testify on 236? Chris, would you? Do you want Chris to come up for a minute?
Yeah, could you come up and?
Chris, would you be willing to come up for a minute? Thank you for coming up. Senator Waters has a question for you.
Thank you. For the record, Chris Elms, Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Energy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. And
Senator, turn your mic on.
sorry about that. Thanks so much, Chris. And you heard the comment from Amanda about concern about retaining the word commission. And do you have any concerns about that or not?
Yeah, and I think Amanda obviously summed up where the department was on that. I'm sorry I don't have the bill or the amendment in front of me, but I think, you know, that addition had been intended to clarify that what we're talking about here is specific to the electric assistance program and isn't an attempt to move all of the energy efficiency low-income programs within the energy efficiency side of the SBC. I think our view, and Amanda can correct me if I'm wrong, was that is made clear elsewhere in statute, and that's not what this bill is intended to do. This bill is intended to focus on the electric assistance program portion of the SBC.
Thank you. And I just want to have that on the public record. I think we're okay then. Yeah.
Great. Any further
Thank you.
questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Anybody else wants to testify on 236? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. Okay. And when Senator Waters is ready, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 237. Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 237 relative to the Office of Consumer Advocate and Site Evaluation Committee. And you'll see that the bill adds the word facilities on page 5. And then down on lines 15 to 17, it includes formally here, for purposes of this paragraph, material interest includes, but is not limited to the interest represented by a consumer advocate pursuant to RSA 363-28-2. So that's the language of the bill, but what is the need for this? I think that we all applaud the work of the Office of the Consumer Advocate in terms of having the deep expertise and the legal ability to be able to advocate for consumers in the state. As you know, the last couple of years, we spent a lot of time on site evaluation committee transformation, and we all participated in that work, and I think that was a very good effort. It did seem to me at the time that I felt at the time we probably should have included this change as well, that as we were shifting around the responsibilities and the functions of the site evaluation committee, that it was important to have a capacity of the consumer advocate to respond to citing. Now, I know the argument can be made, and we have the letter from the PUC, that really the consumer advocate is dealing with issues of electric rates. This is citing and more environment and so on. To me, it's hard for me to imagine that issues around siting of generation would not affect rates, because certainly the cost of creating and the cost of everything involved with that siting is going to affect eventually what the cost of electricity would be. And so that there would be a role for the consumer advocate to bring that forward. And I know that the PUC has mentioned that, yes, they have a public attorney who does, and they have public hearings that represent those things, but this particular expertise in the Office of Consumer Advocate around issues of cost of electricity is one that individual may not have. So that's the argument for this. Obviously there are different positions on it, but I think if we're really concerned about protecting the consumers in the state and the whole area of power supply, generation, distribution, transmission, that this makes a lot of sense. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions from the committee? All right. seeing
Thank
none,
you.
Thank you. Dawn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Waters.
Welcome back again.
Back again. I forgot to say the last time I sat down that I'm Donald Crease. I'm the consumer advocate. My job pursuant to RSA 363-28 is to represent the interests of residential utility customers. I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 237, which Senator Waters was kind enough to introduce at my request. In the world I'd rather live in, this bill would be unnecessary because I think the current enabling statute of the Site Evaluation Committee actually allows for our participation as a state agency. Nevertheless, I'm sitting here and not across town at the Walker Building, where the Site Evaluation Committee is currently holding a hearing without me. Why? Because we were told that we could not be a party as the Site Evaluation Committee takes up, right this minute, the question of the X178 transmission project of Eversource. The X178 project is an effort to spend in excess of $400 million rebuilding a transmission line in western New Hampshire. It is part of $5 billion of so-called asset condition transmission projects that are currently in the pipeline, somewhere between planning and construction and completion. And these projects, asset condition projects, receive no scrutiny whatsoever. None. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission isn't looking at them. The regional bodies that are associated with ISO New England aren't looking at them. And right now, the Site Evaluation Committee, without the participation of the ratepayer advocate, is deciding whether it will exercise its discretionary jurisdiction to take up the project. When we asked to intervene in the X178 proceeding, we were unanimously rebuffed. And we were told, or at least one member of the SEC pointed out, that she regards the Site Evaluation Committee as essentially a meta zoning body that takes up land use questions, the way a zoning board does. Well, with respect to that person, and to anybody else who holds that view, that's not what the enabling statute of the Site Evaluation Committee says. The reason we take these land use decisions that have to do with energy facilities and have a state board deliberate on them is because it is important, not just for land use reasons, but for broad public policy reasons, to make the right choices about what energy facilities are reasonable for this state to build. It's widely assumed that if we participate in SEC proceedings, we would slow things down. We would not. We are not obstructionists. Some of you may remember the Northern Pass project. That was live when I was first taking office. At the time Northern Pass was a live concern in the state, the president of Public Service Company of New Hampshire was a very nice fellow named William Quinlan. And as Mr. Quinlan was preparing to leave his job and move on to new responsibilities with the parent company, he sat down and met with me. And what I said to Mr. Quinlan at the time was, "Why didn't you ever call me? I was waiting for you to call me and ask me what it would take to get the state's consumer advocate up there with PSNH, urging the state to build Northern Pass." And my point isn't that I would have inevitably supported Northern Pass. It's that I would have told PSNH that if they were willing to guarantee certain benefits to the ratepayers of this state, I was prepared to support it. Because we didn't build Northern Pass, whatever benefits accrue to the public out of that transmission line are now accruing to the people in the neighboring state of Maine. Why? Because Central Maine Power did call my counterpart in Maine, the public advocate, and asked him, what would it take to get him up there supporting the project? He cut a deal with them, and he supported the project, and it is being completed today. It's called the NECEC project. So I'm just pointing out that we understand at the Office of the Consumer Advocate that this state needs more energy infrastructure. It is just as likely as not that if we were to participate in SEC proceedings, we would be in there telling the SEC, yes, you should greenlight this project. It's important to the ratepayers of this state because it will make sure that service is safe and reliable and at the lowest possible cost. Now, I just heard Senator Avard allude to a letter from the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities, that's the first I've heard of it. The Public Utilities Commission did not do me the courtesy of sending me a copy of their letter. But I gather that they point out to you that under the SEC statute, there is an entity, I guess you would call it, called Counsel for the Public. And there is such a thing. The Counsel for the Public is appointed by the Department of Justice. Its statutory charge is, I've looked at it a bunch of times, it's confusing, it's contradictory, and it doesn't focus on ratepayer interests. So I'm not trying to denigrate the Counsel for the Public. I'm just saying, I think in concert with what I heard Senator Waters say, that we bring different expertise to the table. And it has to do with the energy facilities and the energy needs and the utility service of the state. We understand that. And so I think for that reason, we have a legitimate place in the room when the SEC conducts proceedings. I don't imagine that we will want to participate in every SEC docket. Some of them are merchant facilities that really don't necessarily have an impact on the ratepayers of the state. I doubt that we would be active there. But in cases like the X-178 project that will be passed through automatically into federally regulated transmission rates, and our share of that $400 million is $40 million, I want to be there, and I want to put Eversource to its proof, because I'm not saying that project shouldn't be built. I'm saying that project should just be justified. That's what the law demands. So I think that's all I have to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Chris, we'll bring up the Department of Energy.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Deputy Commissioner Chris Elms of the New Hampshire Department of Energy. We are neutral on the bill. The Department of Energy is not on the SEC, but we do, once a certificate is granted, we do handle monitoring and enforcement of SEC certificates. That was a change 2 years ago. And then obviously, just as the state's energy policy agency, we're interested in a functional and prudent siting of energy facilities. So I will say we're neutral on the bill, but we are comfortable with it. And, you know, I haven't seen the letter from the PUC, so I can't speculate on what it says. I'm struggling to see what issue might there be to allowing the consumer advocate to participate. Frankly, as I think Don alluded to, he has a small office with limited time. So if he thinks that devoting his time to an SEC docket is appropriate, then I don't see an issue with that. There might be value within the statutory mission. And then I think Don also did talk about another issue that I wanted to also talk about with you, and that's the asset condition problem. You know, nominally, asset condition projects are meant to replace obsolete or deteriorated structures. It's not new lines like you might see with a transmission reliability project. Reliability project would be creating a new line, and that goes through a really robust stakeholder process at ISO New England on the regional level before going to the FERC. The FERC assumes that that process happens and passes those costs along or approves that recovery. For these projects, these asset condition projects that are working on maintenance, there is none of that stakeholder process. There really is no scrutiny at the national level, the regional level, or even the state level. You know, as you know, transmission costs are substantial. They represent about 30% of wholesale market costs. You know, and what we're seeing here, I'm sorry, I'm just some data. you know, looking ahead, 87% of transmission spending by 2030 is looking to be on asset condition projects. Forecasts say New England consumers will invest an additional $5.4 billion in asset condition projects by 2030. So, you know, I think Don talked about a specific project, but if you look at this class of projects as a whole, we're looking at maybe $500 million to New Hampshire ratepayers by 2030. Again, with very little to no scrutiny. Something has to be done at some point, and maybe that's something we'll talk about in the future. You know, there is an important function with these asset condition projects, and again, we're not saying we shouldn't be doing projects, but we do have a regulatory process that we should have so to provide scrutiny on the spending. Again, this bill won't fix that problem, but from our perspective, regulatory scrutiny is a valuable tool to make sure that we're doing what we need to do and we're doing it prudently, so we don't have any issues from the Department of Energy's perspective.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. All right, Griffin, come up and tell us why it's a bad idea. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Senator Pearl, members of the committee. For the record, Griffin Roberge, Government Affairs with Eversource Energy. Eversource is opposed to Senate Bill 237 as introduced, which, as has been discussed, it would authorize the consumer advocate to intervene in, SEC proceedings. As has been discussed, under current statute, the Attorney General has the ability to appoint a counsel for the public to represent the public interest in SEC proceedings concerning the siting of energy facilities. This individual is an automatic party to all SEC proceedings, much like the one that the consumer advocate discussed was occurring this morning. He is there, and he serves to represent the public interest, and obviously throughout proceedings can certainly retain the expertise of consultants to provide expert testimony to, again, advocate for the public interests. Under the OCA's enabling statute, as is described in the bill, the consumer advocate represents the interests of residential utility ratepayers in proceedings concerning rates, charges, tariffs, and consumer services. And again, pursuant to the Site Evaluation Committee's statute, the SEC is primarily focused on reviewing proposed energy projects to ensure that an applicant has the technical and financial capability to build and operate the project, to ensure that the project does not unreasonably interfere with the state's environmental resources and local interests, and also serves the public interest. It does not have the authority over utility rate making. We at Eversource feel the SEC is not a venue designed to debate the necessity or the prudence of any given energy facility, including electric transmission projects like the one that was previously referenced. Any such concerns about electric transmission projects, because they are subject to federal jurisdiction, should be addressed at the regional and federal levels through the Planning Advisory Committee, which is administered by ISO New England, and by filing a challenge at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which again ultimately has jurisdiction over these projects. And I do respectfully want to push back a little bit at previous testimony that indicated, there is no review, no discussion on any of these types of asset condition projects like our X-178. Eversource has been active at the Planning Advisory Committee administered by, again, ISO New England. We have presented before that PAC on 3 different occasions. We have provided over numerous slides of information in an 11-page memo responding to stakeholder feedback and questions. We've met with state officials, consumer advocates, municipal officials, and others outside of the PAC planning process. In short, we view that our project and the process that it's going through, illustrates opportunities for that stakeholder review at those levels. Folks who claim that the process illustrates that there are deficiencies with the review process, we view are simply just dissatisfied with the outcome of those processes. I, again, want to note that the regional review of these proposed projects is unique to New England, as frankly, many other regions have limited opportunity for regional stakeholder review. The PAC provides a forum for parties to ask questions, provide feedback for upcoming transmission projects, and transmission owners like Eversource bear the risk of challenge to any potential investment. So it is on us to make sure that we are providing the information and answering the questions that folks are asking, because obviously we wouldn't want a challenge or anything like that. We obviously want to show that we are a good steward of ratepayer dollars, that we are making these investments. And so we are encouraged to address these concerns before embarking upon a project. I also, do want to note that I want to speak a little bit on the X178 project itself, because there was some discussion on it today. This is about a 40-plus mile line, transmission line that runs from Campton up to Whitefield in the North Country, and it is a very important line, in our view, to rehabilitate and bring up to code. We are proposing, replacing a lot of the structures along the line from wood to weathered steel. The average age of those structures is north of 45 years old. It's a line that has shown significant need for replacement, runs through, if you've been up to the North Country, quite rugged terrain. It's not easily accessible. The weather up there is, quite serious and everything like that. Runs through the White Mountain National Forest. And we view that rebuilding this line is certainly important to continue to serve our 30,000 customers who live and operate up in the North Country. And obviously, as has been mentioned, it is the subject of a proceeding occurring this morning at the Site Evaluation Committee. But as I previously discussed, we do feel that the Office of the Consumer Advocates Authority is separate and distinct from what is currently there with the Counsel for the Public under existing statute. And for decades, the two have operated quite effectively in their respective roles, with the OCA at the PUC on the one hand and the Counsel for the Public at the other at the SEC. We do not feel that there is any basis for concluding that the Counsel for the Public or the Attorney General cannot adequately represent the public at the SEC. At best, we do feel that the OCA's participation would be respectfully unnecessarily redundant, which could increase project costs and slow down project development. And additionally, more problematic, because the SEC, we feel, is not the proper venue for the OCA to be making these arguments, we feel that authorizing the OCA to intervene in SEC proceedings could create confusion by suggesting that the legislature wants to expand the scope of the SEC's authority beyond citing to also take on rate-making functions. In conclusion, we do feel this bill would undermine the SEC's review process and could potentially lengthen the time to review proposed projects, which could run counter to, again, the legislative efforts that this committee has made in recent years with House Bill 281 and House Bill 609. And with that, happy to conclude testimony and answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions? Senator Waters?
Thank you, Griffin. And so you did say that it's the statute for the SEC mentions public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to imagine public interest doesn't include cost. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
That's true. And what was mentioned before with, help me, Northern Pass. That was a very intense and lengthy docket. The the Counsel for the Public was involved in that entire proceeding. During that proceeding, there were certainly the retention of consultants to review the cost and benefits of proposed projects, what would be the impact to consumers and other entities in the state. So again, we do feel that, with the Counsel for the Public's current role, we do feel that that issue is adequately addressed.
Follow?
But you did say that it is optional as to whether a public counsel is appointed in a given case?
So under the statute, they are a full automatic party to those cases.
Okay, I misunderstood
Yep.
that then. So the larger question is about potential costs to consumers, and we do have that expertise to examine that in the Office of Consumer Advocate. And so isn't there a certain logic to having the very best and long-standing expert on considering cost to consumers be able to express an opinion rather than being the door shut for them to have a voice.
Sure, no, and I thank you for the question there, Senator Waters. You know, again, as I mentioned, we do feel that because these projects, these transmission projects are subject to federal jurisdiction, we feel that the opportunity is there for people to, you know, raise concerns, again, as I mentioned, through the Planning Advisory Committee at the regional level, as well as FERC. You know, we know, you know, there have been, you know, the OCA here in the state, as well as other consumer advocates across the region, have certainly posed questions to us at the regional level on our X178 project. You know, in August of last year, they also penned a letter to us asking for further information, but did make clear in that letter that they do feel that they have an avenue through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to lodge a complaint and question the prudency of our investment. There's certainly an option available to them to pursue. And again, I think that these processes here that exist at the regional and federal level are adequate to address those cost concerns.
Senator Rosenwald.
Oh, I just.
You got one more? I'm
I
sorry.
mean, aside from the fact it's awfully hard to catch a horse once it's out of the barn, would you disagree with Chris Elm's estimate of a $500 million potential cost to New Hampshire ratepayers?
Thank you for the question. So I could certainly follow up with you on that. I don't want to be in a position here. I just don't know. I'd have
It's
to
going to
talk to
cost
folks
something.
internally.
shall we say.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Senator Rosenwald.
Thanks for taking my
Yes.
energy question.
Good to see you.
So I don't know if you've read the letter from the administrator of the SEC.
So I just became aware of that in the public testimony today, so I imagine I'll be likely
Okay,
talking
you'll
to
be
Max
reading.
afterwards.
But,
so.
so the public counsel's duties are, it seems like they're twofold. One is to protect the quality of the environment, and the second one is to make sure there's an adequate energy supply. But there's nothing about value in here. And the way I'm thinking about value is with the drug Ozempic, which is incredibly expensive,
Yes.
but has such high value in terms of reduction of disease that it's worth paying for.
Okay.
But there's nothing that I can tell from the public counsel that they're looking at value. And wouldn't it be useful for the ratepayers if the SEC considered the value of a project? Even if it's going to cost $500 million, maybe it's going to be so great because nobody's going to be electrocuted or the lines aren't going to come down every time it's windy out.
Sure. Yeah, no, I understand. So I guess before addressing your question, Senator Rosenwald, I do want to just note some other aspects of the X178 line that, you know, is the subject of the discussion. You know, as I mentioned previously, this is a line that is getting up to a point where it's reaching the end of its useful life. And again, it serves quite a bit of our customers up in the North Country. And in our view, as we've articulated at the regional and federal levels, is we think that it is more cost effective to do a full line rebuild all at once. We do not feel, you know, as others may feel, to do more of a piecemeal approach over time, because we feel that that would be more costly to ratepayers because we would have to go back and redo the line on numerous instances. Inflation would be a factor, the need to get various permits over and over again, bothering abutters. We do feel that taking this approach is certainly a more cost-effective approach to retain the resiliency and reliability of this line for our customers. You know, to the point, you know, we do take regular inspections of the line. We have started to do emergency work on the line because, you know, we are seeing that there really is a need to address this immediately, because if ever an outage does occur, this isn't something that takes just a few hours to restore. This is a multi-day restoration. To your point about value for the ratepayers, again, you know, I think Eversource certainly feels that there is adequate opportunity for folks to weigh in, as folks have been doing, at the regional and federal levels on these proposed projects. The SCC has been primarily a board that looks at land use the land use impacts of these types of projects. And again, going to your point, I realize, the statute, I think you read the statute directly, but that hasn't prevented the Council for the Public from, again, as I mentioned to Senator Waters' questions, looking at the cost and benefits of various projects in the past, as they have in the Northern Pass project, and articulating those benefits that consumers in the state might have, while also weighing the costs. So I hope that answers your question. I went on for a bit there. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Anybody else who would like to testify on Senate Bill 237? All right, seeing none, we will close the hearing. Max, do we have any FNs that are not exact? So
228.
Yeah, we have.
yeah, I thought we had one today we had to do.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking there was one, so that's okay. So
Something
we have,
exact.
all right, we have motion for exact. We have-
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Do you know whether Senator Avard is going to come back?
I do not know when Senator Avard's going to be back. He said he may be out for a bit. I can certainly put us into recess for a little bit if you'd like me to do that and see when he comes back.
Why don't we, 5 minutes, and was he just introducing a bill, or?
Well, he possibly had something after that as well, or an interview he had.
Did he mention noon? I thought I heard him say noon.
Yeah, so I'm not certain. So let's do this. Before we go into recess, let's look at 228. Is there,
I'll just tell you what's up with it.
yeah, let's go over that and see what happens, and then we'll go from there.
I think it's fairly clear. I talked to him before the hearing, so. I'd like to move Senate Bill 228 on.
Did we vote going into exec? I don't think we did we?
Yeah, we did.
Yes, we did.
We voted on it?
Second.
To go into executive session.
Okay, I remember we got,
we met.
I don't think we voted. All in favor of going into exec? Aye. All right. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that we had a couple of weeks to continue working on this, and there's been a lot of discussion with Jim Monahan and Lindsay Burgoyne, and also with, I want to, really express thanks to folks at the Department of Energy, while neutral, giving us some good advice and feedback on various issues in it. I think that you see the amendment, and I will just mention a couple of things in it. First and foremost, let me say that there seems to be good comfort with and general agreement on the underlying bill of 228 to retain the 18 megawatt increase and the 500 kilowatts. So that is important for the bill. But the things that needed to be kind of continue to work on was to make sure we had sufficient language to prevent so-called double dipping, so that if somebody who is a customer generator may participate in a group member and to conduct, and then also you see the annual utility charge accounting there. I will say that we heard in the hearing there was some concern from Eversource about the accounting process. And I had some conversation with Griffin yesterday with that, and I know Jim Bonahan had to do with Michael Okada as well. I think that if we pass this through the Senate, that we will have time to continue working on whether we need to, find a way to address some of those concerns about that. We also made the needed correction to restore the word household where we had homeowner, because that was just a mistake made with that. And then we clarified the definition on the last page of the amendment about nonprofit educational institutions or any district or entity created for a special purpose, administered or funded by any above-mentioned government units. Such districts or entities include public housing authorities. So anyways, as you know, we've been working hard to make sure that this provision actually works for customer generators is at the size and capacity that makes the investment worthwhile here. We do anticipate the passage of this will promote investment and also make it so that the folks who were affected by this power can save some money, and we can potentially reduce transmission costs as well through it. I will note that there was some question earlier with Senate Bill 232, which is meaning to protect retroactivity, prevent retroactivity. Do note here that we are talking on the first page about existing customer generators. So my concern was that these existing folks who now wanted to become part of a group, is that prevented because it would be an existing one, not prospective. And I think that the solution there will be a slight tweak to 232. So I think this 228 can go forward as is, and we will address what problem may or may not be created by 232 in 232. So the long and short of it, Mr. Chairman, is I move Amendment 671.
All right, so we have to move the bill itself first.
I thought I did.
Did you?
Oh, I move 228 off the pass.
All right, now you're moving the amendment 671?
671.
All right, I had reached out to Senator Avard to see if he was okay with this, and I was waiting to see if I had a response.
If you want to wait, we can wait.
And I do not have a response. What I want to do before we vote on this is, let's take a 5-minute recess and let me see if I can have contact with him, just to make sure he didn't have any concerns when I was
I
addressing.
talked to him earlier, you seemed okay,
He
but
seemed-
let's wait.
Well,
No, let's
all right,
let's try
we're
it.
going to do a 5-minute recess here, and I'm going to attempt to make contact with Senator Avard, and then we will be right back at 11:05. Back in out of recess, and we have a motion on the floor of ought to pass and a moving of amendment 671 ought to pass. We have any discussion from the committee? And this would be on the amendment.
I'm fine with it.
All right. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, we're moving, Senator Waters moves ought to pass as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Senator McConkey. Discussion? I'm just going to say this, in the absence of Senator Avard, I'm moving this bill forward because we're coming up on a time deadline and we have to move it. So I'm going to move this forward. I'm comfortable doing it. As far as I know, everything's okay. I know we have some concerns that were raised by some of the stakeholders on billing challenges and things like that. We haven't addressed those in here, but I'm okay with letting this go forward. They're going to have to, go and have this conversation on the House side if they still have those concerns and feel they're valid. I'm going to recommend we just pass this, put it on consent. If Senator Avard has a problem, a concern, then we'll pull it off consent and address it that way.
As I said in my remarks, I'm committed to find a
Yes.
way forward on that, and I think we can, but
Yeah.
that's important.
All right, further discussion. Senator Rosen.
Well, as I'm reading the fiscal note, it may or may not be taken by Chairman Gray.
That's correct.
I mean,
There may be
there are
other
like
possibilities.
93 FM bills on the
Yes.
calendar this week. This one doesn't have an appropriation. It's not a giant cost, no new positions. If I were sitting in these shoes, I'd probably just say no, but it's possible.
Yeah.
That it would go to finance.
And I'm certain if I asked Senator, or Senator Avard asked Senator Gray to take it, that he would if there was something we felt we needed to address. So the options are available. There he is. All right.
Whoa.
So Senator, we are in exec session. We have moved 228 to pass, and we've moved Senator Waters' amendment. And we're now about to vote on the ought to pass as amended.
Aye.
And are you ready for the vote?
Yeah.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent?
So moved. Seconded by Senator Avard.
All in favor?
Aye.
Senator Waters, you want to take this one out?
I shall.
All right. Our chair is back, so I'm turning exec session over to him.
All in favor of the bill as amended? Is there a
Aye.
motion for that? Yeah.
Senator McConkey.
Senator McConkey moves it, Senator Waters seconded, discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
Consent?
Senator
Second.
Pearl on consent and seconded by Senator McConkey. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, Senator McConkey definitely wants to take this one.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
235? Yeah.
Max, how are we doing so far? Am I going too fast for you?
I'll move 235.
Second.
Discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
I second.
Discussion.
Seems necessary. I've heard very compelling testimony that it's a necessary bill, and I'm happy to support it.
All in favor of SB 235?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none?
Consent?
Second.
Okay, we have a tie for a second.
Sorry, as long as I'm first.
I will withdraw.
Senator Pearl and we're going to do it with Senator Rosenwald, make it bipartisan. So all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Who would like to take this out?
I'll take it up, sure.
Oh, Senator Pearl would like to take it out?
Unless Senator Waters wants it. It's his bill.
No, you're kidding. Senator Waters, would you like to take it out?
Yes, sir.
All right, Senator Waters, it's yours.
We're pretty good with 236?
I think
Yes,
so.
I think so.
I'll move 236 to pass.
Second.
Okay, discussion. All in favor of 236?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Consent?
Seeing none.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Waters. Senator Pearl mentioned it. So all in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Who would like to take this out? How about me?
All right.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, could we just a second to talk about 231, not a motion, but,
Are you sure they're still behind?
so
No, not now.
I just, as I said to Senator McCarthy, I think his expertise on this will be very helpful. And just my one comment might be is that I think there's some confusion in the language about the relationship between shoreline protection and the setback things. I get the intent here and of the bill, and I would like to support a version of it. The two things I wonder about is that whether or not we ought to have an exception for agricultural on the 50-foot for the driveway, or not. Again, Senator McConkey, I think, would know best on that. And then secondly, I just wonder whether, just to make it easier, just take the word wetlands out of there. It's really about setbacks. And the wetland thing, I mean, the bill creates confusion by mentioning that statute about the shoreline and then not telling us, well, which takes precedent. So if we just, and then the wetland thing really isn't addressed. So I'm not sure that it would affect his intent is that those communities that are setting these ridiculous setbacks, I think the bill, if we made those changes, would still take care of the problem he identified without opening up the can of worms. So I just to throw those things out
So
because
I'm a little uncomfortable with it at the way it is right now, but I would be comfortable with the motion of re-refer. If there would be a motion.
And I would say this bill, because of the changing of the frontage requirement, is going to have a real huge impact onto every rural community in this state. Big time. Well, not even that. You're taking many of the towns in the state have enacted zoning requirements, and especially as we heard relating to agricultural practices and trying to preserve the agricultural community as it exists in a lot of our rural communities. And this is going to be a real challenge to many of the towns if you drop that frontage requirement down to 50 feet. I'm at this point, I'm comfortable in doing that, and I would support a re-refer, because I'd like to have the opportunity to go back to my rural communities and have a discussion with them and understand the full impact that it's going to have on them.
And I'm sure the prime sponsor would be appreciative instead of it being killed. So, and I'm very sanguine when we rush into micromanaging local ordinances, local zoning, local planning. Because once we start doing that and get the taste of that in our mouths, as we change over the years, different personalities, different ideas, then we got helter-skelter coming up. And that's just my general feeling. I know everybody's talking about a crisis, but I think this creates another crisis on its own. But I'm willing to give the prime sponsor more time to craft his language so that, maybe we can come up with something else, but.
we might do something about it next year.
Right. So I think if there is a motion to re-refer.
I'll move re-refer.
Is there a second?
Second.
And discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's too sweeping to think that this is going to move forward this year. I really appreciate Senator Waters' comments on road frontage. And I think possibly this could end up being broken into two, and I think re-referring and taking a look at it and seeing what the House and the Senate can get through this year on housing. This isn't as high a priority, but it certainly needs a conversation. So I will support re-refer, and I'd be happy to work with it.
And I really appreciate that. I think the prime sponsor's heart's in the right place, but I think I don't want to open up a can of worms that we can't fix it. But give them time to recraft it. So all in favor of re-refer?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none?
Consent?
Consent by Senator Pearl, seconded by Senator Waters. All in favor of consent?
Aye. I'll take this out if you want.
Okay.
I'm happy to.
Excuse me, I didn't drink, I promise.
Mr. Chairman, if I just may mention on 237 that Senator Pearl had a suggestion during the hearing. And just to say, Consumer Advocate first came and discussed it and the need for it. We heard some, while neutral, some words of comfort on this from the Department of Energy. And then we did have a letter in opposition to the PUC, which I think accurately recognize that they have a public counsel, but that public counsel doesn't really do what may need to be done. Senator Pearl suggested that maybe what it could be is that upon request of the consumer advocate to the AG, that the AG may authorize inclusion on a case-by-case basis. And I've asked Don and Chris to think about that. And if that seems like a way that might mediate between any anxieties about delays or this, that would mean there'd be a judgment offered there. So we'll see. I just wanted to mention it because in the public session, that may be something we see.
Senator Wilson?
Well, I like that direction a lot. I'm just wondering if we might consider, upon request of the consumer advocate, the AG shall appoint a public counsel.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what they come up with. I guess, in a way, if that's the case, it's back to the original bill. Because
Essentially, it would be,
yeah. Say, I want to be in there.
Yeah.
I
And
think
it
we're
won't be that
leaving.
There's a kind of just a check by the Attorney General, and that's, to me, seems kind of appropriate, but we can talk.
Okay.
All right, I've got to go introduce a bill.
So is there a motion to move out of exec?
So move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You are dismissed. Good job, everybody.